Hello, welcome to the fourth in our series on growing a healthy volunteer culture. Yes, we're at number 4, and today we're looking at the issue of choosing with care. So we've looked at our big picture, how we sort of set a kingdom vision. We've talked about how we look at the principles that kind of underpin a healthy volunteer ministry. And then we looked at leading with vision. So this is really the next step in thinking about that. We've looked at where we're going, where the destination is. It's been very future oriented. It's been very picture, hopefully very inspiring. But now we're looking at how we get the right people in the right places so that we can do that ministry together in a way which honors God and which honors people, which builds both people, but also builds the kingdom of God through the ministry that we're involved in. And so that's what we're involved in today, choosing with care. And the analogy that I'm going to use today is that of a London bus. Now, if you've been to London, this is what they used to look like. They look a bit more modern nowadays, but this is a classic London red bus I remember riding on when I was a young lad growing up in London. So this is a Stephen Covey analogy that that we know the destination, but actually we want the right people on the bus in the right seats. And that's an analogy that I'll use when I talk about the bus. It's about the destination, and here it's Barnet in North London, but this is about how we get the right people in the right seats. And we're going to use principles that we've already covered in sessions 1 to 3. I'm not going to kind of go back over those. I'm going to assume that you're kind of absorbing those and putting those into practice. And I just want to remind us of a couple of those principles. One is stewardship. Let's just keep in the back of our mind the whole time that we're here to steward people well. So choosing people, or we could use the word selecting people, is about stewarding them. And that may mean saying no, or putting them in a different role to what we expected. Secondly, expectations. Let's have our expectations set. Volunteers, as we've said, are capable partners. Do you remember that high impact model from Newell and Associates? Volunteers are capable of doing the ministry. And I would urge you to set expectations early and just to be very open through the process. I found having a process very, very clarifying for people. People sometimes will say yes to doing things without counting the cost. And I think we need to help people through that process of saying yes to something, because when you say yes to one thing, it means saying no to something else. And further down the line, you can get the situation where people say, oh, I'm too busy, or I wasn't aware of the commitment. And we'll come to an example of that in a minute. So a few key principles. Firstly, this is a mutual process. So it's not all about you as the volunteer leader making the decision. It's actually a two-way process. This is an opportunity for the applicant, the person, to make a choice as well. We want them to make a choice to join with us. This is mutual and two-way. Secondly, it is a process. I've just hinted at that already. It's a process. And if I don't have a process, then the question is what happens when someone who's clearly unsuitable applies for the role? What if they're not a Christian? What if we know that it's just they're clearly not suited, but we haven't quite got a way of telling them why we think that? You know, we may be playing into our own biases. We may be wrong. It might be that they are perfectly suited to it, but actually we've got our bias and our way of doing things, and we haven't seen that maybe there's another way of doing things. So I just want to say it's important to have a process to filter out and to say, look, you know what, this is what we do for everybody. So I can say to people, this is what we do for everybody at CMF who's coming into these roles. We're not picking on you. Okay, this is a process that we're doing. And that leads on really to the next point. It's objective. This is really key. That process being the same for everyone is key. Now, in CMF, I know a lot of people, and I've had people apply for roles or say, I'll do that role. And I've known them well, and I've known that they'll be fantastic. And I could appoint them just like that. I wouldn't have to do any process, any applications, any interviews. I know they'll be great for it. But again, I might be wrong. Again, it means that I may be choosing people who are like me or who are my friends. And I've got to not only be seen to, but actually genuinely be objective about that process. And then also, if you think about alignment, it's okay if I bring my friends, but again, what if I'm not here at CMF forever? I want people to come on and be aligned to CMF and aligned to the kingdom vision. And I often find that this objective process, actually just going through the process, helps envision people. People don't often get it straight away. They may seem really keen and say, yeah, I get the vision, I want to be part of it. Remember after session 3, but actually sometimes the process of choosing carefully reveals that vision and helps people to understand it more and ask their questions. It's also helpful. So please, this is what we're doing this for, a mutual process which is objective. It's also prayerful. It gives opportunity over time to say, well, okay, we're going to ask you to apply, and then we'll set a date for an interview. That just gives time to be praying and seeking God, again, on both sides. And it's rigorous, and we'll come back to this in just a moment. So I would say that choosing volunteers is a mutual, objective, prayerful and rigorous process to get the right people in the right places on that bus, if you remember. Now, sometimes this can go wrong, and I have made so many mistakes with choosing people. I'm not going to tell you them all because it's embarrassing. Here's an example of one that comes to mind. So you're our Catalyst team leader. So this is one of the teams that I think you may have heard about that we have in the UK. And when appointed, your global catalyst said, I'll do a role, I'll do whatever you want me to do, what needs doing, and I'll do it. And you allocated her the global role. And over the last 8 months, you've asked her to do various things, such as contact those from the region who are overseas, to contact retired missionaries in your area. You've asked her to consider running a Who is My Neighbour course, it's a CMF course, and to encourage students and juniors to apply for the global track, which is a training program that we do. However, when you've inquired 2 or 3 times if this has been done, it hasn't been. Others on the team have been active, but she, and actually one other person, but she hasn't been active. So that's a problem, isn't it? Can you see we've got a problem? And immediately I'm starting to think, what's gone wrong? How can we fix this problem? It can be incredibly frustrating, can't it, as a leader, when you have lots of unanswered emails or people aren't doing what they said they would do. And so I want you just to pause and just think of any examples that you have when something's gone wrong with a volunteer, and ask you just to pause and think, can you trace this to a problem with choosing the right people for that bus and putting them in the right seats? Are you thinking, do you know what, maybe this person I'm thinking of is on the wrong bus. They're going to a different destination. Or maybe they're on the right bus, but they're just in the wrong seat. They're in the wrong role. So have a think about that. And so really the question today is, how do we mitigate this? How do we avoid problems such as this? And one thing that I do just in general in my life, and this isn't specifically for volunteering, but this is just a general leadership principle that I have in my life across many different areas, is that I ask that God will lead me to people who are full of faith. Okay, and I use this acronym for faithful, available, initiating, teachable, and hungry. And I mentioned that last time, and I'm not going to go into that here because that's just something that I generally use. So I want you to kind of take that and just park it, just place it to one side as something that I just use in my personal life to help me think through things. And I want to just now apply a little bit more to how we do work here at CMF with volunteers. So one way that I do this is through an explore conversation. And this is really to help me structure a conversation. This is somebody who's expressed an interest. They've perhaps heard a vision cast. They've perhaps read the website. They've perhaps seen a video that we've done. They've heard all of that kind of creative communication we spoke about before. And they've said, yeah, I'm interested. So I just had this just the other day from a nurse in one of our regions saying, I'm interested. I want to find out more. And the team leader said to me, John, remind me what I do at this time. And I said, okay, well, I think this is the time for you to have an explore conversation, a telephone conversation, and pick it up. And I just basically provide my team with this sheet, very simple. And I ask them to jot down notes really and think about faith, heart, commitment. What's the reality of faith? in their life? Are they living a life of faith? Are they somebody who you're thinking, yeah, look, we see there's a vibrancy here? What's on their heart? Are they actually, is this the right time for them? Have they got ideas for this role? What would they like to see happen? Does that chime in with what we're doing as a team? And then perhaps after hearing a bit more about the commitment, counting the cost, if you like, what are they able to commit to? Is that something that actually might work for them at this time? And so that's something that I do initially with people. I have an explore conversation. It's quite low level. I don't share that piece of paper with the person. I don't really share it with anybody else, actually. It's for me just to make some notes and to structure my thoughts as I think about them. But I want you to encourage you, when it comes to actually bringing volunteers on board, to be more rigorous in this process. And it's important to be rigorous. It's important. I talk about having a high bar. So often I see in volunteer ministry, people think, well, it's only volunteer ministry, and we'll take anybody. And we've already done this, haven't we? In weeks 2 and 3, we've looked at these principles. Don't just take anybody. Okay, have a process. Keep the bar high, and I would keep it just as high as you would do for paid staff. Just because they're unpaid, it's irrelevant. Remember, we want people with the heart of a volunteer, and volunteers in the wrong roles is just as tragic, really, as staff members in the wrong roles. We want to treat them like we do and value them as we do staff members. So what do I ask people to do? Well, I ask people to complete an application form, and I ask them to go through a formal interview. And I think that's really important. And some people resist. They say, oh, particularly the medics, I don't want to fill in another form. I have to fill in plenty of forms. And I think, yeah, I understand. I agree with you. I'm not a big fan of forms myself. Or some people say, I'm too busy for this. I'm too busy to fill in a form. I'm too busy to have an interview. But I tell you what, every single person who has resisted the process of filling in a form and having an interview, every one of them has come back to me and said, I'm really glad we did that. I found it really clarifying. I found it helpful. I hadn't thought about, this or that or the other. And I also tell you that it's valuable because it helps you to pick up issues. So, for example, the person who seemed overconfident, sure enough, has been overconfident in their leadership in their volunteer role. Or the person who you get that sense during the process that they see other people as a threat to their leadership. Sure enough, they've been appointed as a leader. They've seen other people as a threat to their leadership. And I find time and time again that the process for me as a leader of picking up on these things and just having them there, even if we appoint this person, it may not be a big enough thing to say, well, you're not in the role, but it just means I can pick that up down the line and I can refer back to the interview. And I've shared, if you're watching this, you should have been able to see an example of the application form and the interview pro forma that we use at CMF to help us in this process of bringing volunteers on board. So what we do then is we look at explore conversations, we look at an application form, we look at an interview, and then referee. So that's my selection kind of process, how I choose people. We have the vision cast, then we explore, application form, interview, and references. And what we base our analysis on is on what we call the 6 C's. Okay, the 6 C's, and I've got them here on the screen. And this is used in various formats by a number of organizations. So Newell and Associates use something like this. At CMF, we've been using something like this since well before I arrived. And we use these categories, these C's, as we think about throughout every bit of the process: conversation, application form, verbal interviews, referees. We're thinking about these 6 areas. And I found this really helpful just to have a bit of a structure in my mind for thinking through, why do I think this person's so great for this role? Or why do I think this person isn't right for this role, or isn't right for this organization, for example? So I hope this is helpful. I just want to very briefly go through these 6, okay? And let's start with calling. And calling really is the top one for me. I think many people say character. Yes, I think it is for the role. But firstly, I want to know, is this person right Is this the right time in their life? Is this something that actually they really sense a call to, or are they just coming in and it's just not the right thing? And again, I've dealt with many volunteers who they may have the character, be wonderful Christians, be very gifted, really love CMF, but actually they're doing this out of a sense of duty. They're doing it because they think they should, because there's nobody else to do it. And I really just want to start by asking people, particularly in the interview process, and you can see that on my example sort of interview sheet, what is it that resonates with you? What are your gifts and passion? Why now? Why is this something that you're sensing that you should be doing now? So calling to the role, that sense of God's timing and hand on the process, really important. Christian testimony, again, for a Christian organization, really important. And again, we ask this on the application form, but it's good to ask questions and to discuss and to help people see this is really a sense of God's calling. Now, of course, there'll be some roles in organizations that you have, and sometimes even in churches, where we're open to people volunteering and being involved who aren't Christians. Really important, actually, that we get non-Christians involved in service. But that's a slightly different angle, a different topic. We're really talking in this course about leader volunteers. Okay, so that's what we're trying to look at, sort of higher level people who are going to lead and develop other volunteers in a Christian setting. So that's why that's really high. Character, and again, we have all had huge amounts of leadership teaching on the importance of character. We know how character traits and issues have come to the fore in many high-profile cases, very sadly, but also those that we know, and we see it in ourselves as well at times when our character needs to be strong. So one thing I want to say about character, just one thing, is I'm looking for people who are teachable. There's a real sense when I'm doing my work, I'm looking for people who are teachable. I want people who are, and I see teachability as humility plus integrity. So some people say, if you're looking for a leader, the first thing that you look for is a humble person, some person who hasn't got ego, who's humble, who knows themselves, who knows the Lord, and who is a humble person, and someone who has integrity. And ultimately, that's the combination of humility and integrity is somebody who is teachable. I want people on my team who are ready to learn and to grow, to learn, yes, maybe from me, but actually to learn from one another and to grow, to learn from their team. So teachability is something that I really look out for under character. And we won't go any more into character. There's lots to be said about that. Chemistry next, number 4, chemistry. How will they fit in with the team? So they might have a wonderful Christian with great character, a real sense of calling, but how will they fit with the team? What might you need to make note of? Any tensions, any theological differences, any personality differences? So that's something, and again, lots of questions on the interview form to help with that. One thing that I find helpful is having some values to point to. So a number of people will say, I don't think they will quite fit my team, or there's just something about them that I think will be fantastic for this team, but I can't quite tell you what. And I would just want to encourage you to think, have you thought about your values? You may have some stated values for your organization or for your ministry. But if not, let me encourage you to think those through. It might just be 1 or 2. But I think it's important that you know what culture you want to create, and to help the other person who's applying to think about whether they fit that culture, whether they would love to contribute to that culture. So don't make your values so narrow that no one will fit, but also don't have them so wide that everyone fits, because actually you want a culture, you want a sense of direction. And so at CMF, we've got some values that we just use just to help guide our questions when we interview both staff and volunteers, and it helps us as we consider things. We look at these on team training times. We remind one another of these values, and we've got a couple of core values. I'm not going to read these out. You can pause and read them if you like. We've got a couple of core values, and then we've got some expected values. And again, pause if you'd like to read those. But these values help guide us. We're saying, actually, we want you to see these if you're kind of coming to work with CMF or you're applying. We want you to see them and say, yeah, I can do that. And this is something we're going to refer back to and say, well, actually here at CMF, we are honest. This is who we are. This is what we do. And if there's dishonesty, that's a kind of against the values that are expected, the minimum expected values, if you like. Big one for me in leadership is self-awareness and humility. That actually we're aware of our strengths and weaknesses, and we work hard at growing in our self-awareness and humility on this team. So you get the idea. We have these expected values. We also have some aspirational values. So these are things that we're working towards as a team, and I have shared those on the interview or application pro forma for you just to see. They're things that we're looking to work towards. So I'm looking to have someone on my team who enjoys fun, for example, that actually we have an atmosphere of fun and laughter. And I want someone to be able to fit into that. And we've got 7 others of those. So I hope that's helpful. And I think as we think about chemistry, finally, I would encourage you to go through expectations for the role on both sides. This is the point to go through this, to say, this is what we're expecting. This global role, there are some kind of expectations as to how you'll do that you'll be self-motivated, that you'll make connections with the global team, that you'll report back how you're getting on, that you will attend team meetings. And again, I've given you an example role description before for a team leader of the kind of minimum expectations, and just have a conversation about that. What do you think about that? How do you think that suits you? Do you think you'll be able to cope with that from a time perspective? So that's all of the questions around chemistry. Is this the right fit for you now? And I think also anticipate their questions. What you're hoping is that you're going to get some good questions around expectations. So for example, I love it when I hear questions like these. When someone says, John, what is it you're asking me to do? Yeah, what is it I'm actually going to do? How are you going to help me to do it? Someone might say, well, I'm really keen on running this missionary training course, but I wouldn't know where to start. How will I get help? What are the resources I need? What are the contacts I need? And then how will I see the fruits of my labor? People often don't use those words, but people are wanting to know, how will I see that I'm actually having success? How will we measure whether this is working or not? And I think those are good questions. And if people are asking those, then you're on to something. Okay, so that's chemistry. So that's quite a big one, I think, as we think about teams. The final 2, again, I'll be very brief. Competence. So you can check, are they competent for this role? I think a lot of people in our setting, as medics, are very competent people. They get CMF. They want to be part of what we're doing. But it's good to ask discussions around this and make sure it's the right sort of role for them. Some people are very gifted at administration, great for an admin role, but there are some roles that require lots of administration as a volunteer, and somebody really doesn't do administration. And that doesn't mean they can't be in that role, but it just means you need to have a clear conversation about that and say, well, if you're really struggling with emails, you need someone else on your team who's going to support you in that. Does that make sense? So competence. And then finally, communication. Okay, so are they communicating consistently? Is there a sense that as you speak to them, as they write, that these things match up? Do they communicate consistently over time? Or are you picking up that there's a mismatch between what they've said to one person and what they've said perhaps to another person? Something really to help with this is to check with the referees. And I put that in bold type because people often skip this step. They often say, well, I'm not going to contact the referees. I can't be bothered. It takes too much time. They'll just say that they're really nice. Most referee forms that we receive, are seen by the applicant, and usually people are very polite and very nice. So what I do is I pick up the phone. I telephone referees, and it's incredible what comes up from them. People feel very able, I think, to share openly with you because it's not a recorded conversation. It's a very confidential conversation. You get the nuance of what they're saying about the person. And I found it incredibly helpful. And also I've found a very good way as a secondary gain of building good relationships with others. So often these are church leaders or other ministry leaders, and to actually have a conversation and to share with them some of the, my ministry and what we're doing and how we want to support this person. It might be the pastor of somebody, and I'll always be saying, we really want to make sure, we want you to know we're not duplicating, sorry, the local church. We're not here to try and do what you're doing. We're doing something very different, complementary, alongside. I want to support this person. I'm not here to be his primary discipler. That's for the local church. But we really see this workplace ministry as something that God is calling them to, and we just want to work with you as a church. And is there any way we can support you in what you're doing? So having those conversations, it's a great opportunity. So check with the referees, have a good conversation. It can be incredibly helpful. And then, of course, pray all the way through. Be praying and seeking God to guide the process, to bring things to the forefront of our minds as we seek to serve people well in the process. So that's the 6 C's. I hope that's gives some idea as to how we use them and how we do grade them from 1 to 10, but just as a helpful way of looking at that. And of course, when we interview and when we look at these things, it's not just one person. We really try and make it 2 people. I always have a second person who's looked at the form, who's interviewing with me, who's discerning in this process with me. And it's very helpful when you go back to someone and say yes or no, that you've got 2 people. So if I'm interviewing another team leader for one of our Catalyst teams, I will often interview with another team leader. And that also means that they're there to answer questions. They're there to to be somebody who's in that role already and can give a really clear and honest answer as to what it's really like. So that's really helpful to have someone in as well with you. So let's just go back to our scenario about this this member of your team. So again, I would ask you to imagine that you're a Catalyst team leader in CMF UK, and about this global catalyst who said that, I'll do that role, I'll do whatever role you want, and basically they start to struggle. And as the scenario says, they begin to struggle. You're not hearing back from them, and it's really frustrating. And I just wanted to just quickly say, there are some issues that were in this scenario. It's a real life scenario, slightly anonymized, but there were some issues with the way that we chose this person for the role. And actually, when we traced it back, there were some things we hadn't done. So one thing we hadn't done very well was translate the cause. If you remember that exercise, the person hadn't seen the big picture of how her efforts would contribute towards kingdom goals. So we hadn't done that. We hadn't looked at expectations. We actually, she loved CMF. She felt cool to do something with CMF. She had the character. She communicated really well. Very communicative person. But this just wasn't right for her at this stage of her life. So I think I just said it wasn't an issue of calling. So of course it is actually an issue of calling. So she had all of the other things in place, but this wasn't quite right for her at this stage of her life. She actually had a new job at the time, and was giving much more time to it than she'd expected. And the third factor was actually her friendship with the team leader. She'd been such good friends with the team leader, and she wanted this to help she wanted to help her friend out. So she said, I'll do whatever you like. And it was great because she got this role and nobody else was doing it and everyone was happy. But then sadly, it led to real tensions. It led to a strain on the friendship. It was just very difficult. She didn't really have the heart for the role. And so this subjective error had been made. Okay, there hadn't been an objective enough kind of process really to go through to get her to do that role. So I guess my take home from that role, from that incident, was to be ready to say no. And so that's what I want to finish with as we think about what does it look like at the end of this process to say no and to say yes to somebody. Okay, we're going to start with saying yes first. It's nice and positive. Hopefully lots of people that you go through this process with, you're going to say a big yes to at the end of it. So what do I do? Well, I will, after leaving 24 hours, I always leave time at the end of interviews and so on to say, we're going to pray about it, you pray about it, and I'll get back to you. So after 24 hours, I will call the person and to say yes, say, yeah, we'd love to have you in this role. And then I follow up by email. I then, for these particular roles that we have, I send them a registration form. And then we just need to think carefully about how we announce it. I think it is important who we tell, and this idea of concentric circles where we tell some people. So I remember sort of having a baby. It's like thinking, well, do I tell, who do I tell first? My parents and my auntie, and then I've got, you know, and people like to know, don't they? So it's key to ask those questions. Who are the stakeholders? You know, who are the people who value this ministry, who need to know? And it depends on what role people are doing. You have to work that one out. Who do I need to tell first, as I've said? And then who needs to know so this person has permission to lead? Okay, so for some of our roles, it's really helpful to tell people in our CMF regions, you know, this person is now overseeing global roles. Certainly for the team leader role, it's very important that we're saying, actually, this person has our backing. You know, that's part of the benefit of coming on board as a volunteer, is that you have our backing, you have some authority behind you, and you're backed up by the team in CMF. So saying yes, that's some of the things that I do. Saying no, oh, really, really hard, but please let me implore you to say no. Okay, hopefully it will be easier, because hopefully through the process you both will know, it will become clear that actually, yeah, this isn't quite the right role for me after all. So hopefully you'll be in that situation. But it's happened to me where that the other person has thought they're absolutely fine, and it was actually a very confident medic who thinks they're wonderful at everything, hadn't really twigged that this wasn't the right role. And so the sort of conversation I might have might be like this: you know, it's so good to go through this process together. I might add more. I might add some really positive feedback at that point. I might say, really appreciate your heart, appreciate the time you've taken to, you know, to put into this role. Just all those things. I'll be really clear that I really appreciate them, and I'll say I trust it's been clarifying for you. It's been helpful for you. But actually, as we've taken stock, we're not convinced that this is the right role for you. Okay, so we're just not convinced that this is the right thing for you at this time. Okay, so that's the kind of phrase, and there's no particular words you have to use. That's the sort of thing that I will say. And then there might be some reasons for that, and there might be some follow-up. So it might be that they should be in another role on the team. So it might just be that they're not actually suited for that global role. Actually, they're far better to do the prayer role, for example. And hopefully that will have become evident as we go through. Perhaps they need to be signposted maybe to another organization. Okay, so sometimes people they're just not going to fit, and actually they'd be really happy and thrive somewhere else. And again, with our kingdom glasses on, let's be ready to be generous and point people to other areas of service for the kingdom's sake. Perhaps it's yes, but not yet. That's quite common. So actually, yeah, this would be a great role for you, but in another year. All I'd say to that is beware. I've got plenty of people who would say certain role comes up and they say, oh, I'll do that, I'm just too busy at the moment, but in 2 years' time I'll be fine. Well, actually, often that isn't the case. They're often really busy still in 2 years' time. So I think always be ready to challenge that gently, but genuinely sometimes it's a yes, but not quite yet. So perhaps someone suffered a recent bereavement. You say, yeah, that would be great, but why don't you just take another 6 months and then we'll come back to it. So that might be another reason that you say no. It is good to say no constructively, encouragingly, and kindly, and to assure them of your prayers as they seek to serve God and serve in other areas of their life. And no, when done rightly, can be incredibly freeing and affirming, enabling someone to say yes to something else. And that's why we need God's help in those situations. And it's best also to say no as early as possible. So if you can say no, like with that global role, before that heartache, if there'd been a no right at the beginning, it would have saved a lot of heartache. But actually, the opportunity will also come later, because as we'll discuss in our final 2 weeks, we do build in, reviews. We do have time-limited roles, and that just means that there are times when we maybe do need to say no, and we've recognised that it's more easily doable. So with this lady in this role, after 6 months, we could sit down and say, actually, this isn't working too well. And what's nice about that is because you've got an objective process, she knew that we have that conversation with everybody, like 6 months. We know we're going to have a conversation every 6 months. How is it going? We know that every year that I with all my kind of key team leaders, I do an annual review. So if there's a lack of performance or there's difficulties in some areas, they know I'm not picking on them. And it means that we have this process where we can give feedback and we can both mutually say, actually, I think this is probably not the right time or the right role for me. So yeah, build those opportunities in to say no and see it as a positive. So we'll finish there. What are some of the key takeaways? We want to see the right people on the bus in the right seats. Remember, choosing is a mutual process, prayerfully considering stewardship and setting expectations early. We can explore a potential partnership before commitments are made. It's always a good idea to do that, give people the freedom to have that conversation. Use the 6 C's to help you discern whether this is the right role at the right time. Follow the process. I encourage you, don't rush. Get all the information that you need to make a decision. And have a pre-prepared process through which you say no or yes. Be ready for that. It's helpful. And so questions for our session together. These are the things that we'll look at. I'm going to leave these on the screen. Do think about these before we meet in person. Come ready to discuss these things together. I really look forward to seeing you when we meet face to face. Choosing with care, the 4th of our series, as we understand what a healthy volunteer culture looks like. May God bless you, and I will see you next time.